My proud older brother graduated from the University of Tokyo and is a promising government official. As for me, I have no impressive academic background and work quietly as an editor for a modest magazine. Due to circumstances, our divorced parents took us in separately, and we've lived our lives under different last names. One day, my brother got engaged to the daughter of a high-ranking bureaucrat, but her arrogant father declared, "You're not family," and excluded my mother and me from the family meeting. On the wedding day, the father-in-law went as far as to insult me, saying, "Leave, you middle school graduate." However, the moment my mother called my name, my brother's in-laws started trembling all over. My name is Theodore Smith. I'm 31 years old and currently working as a company employee. I recently switched jobs to a small publishing company, thanks to a connection I made at my previous job. Though I'm still getting used to some aspects of the work, I enjoy it and feel fortunate to have great colleagues. Especially Mr. Nelson, the company president, who feels like a second father to me after my real one. I also have an older brother who's 5 years older than me. His name is Charles Yates. The reason our last names are different is because our parents divorced when I was about to start elementary school. At the time, I was too young to fully understand why, but apparently, differences in their parenting philosophies led them to go separate ways. My brother went to live with my father, while I stayed with my mother. From as far back as I can remember, sharing a bed with my brother was a given. I still vividly recall how something felt overwhelmingly missing the first night I slept in a bed without him. That's when I stopped being Theodore Yates like my father and brother and began using my mother's maiden name, Theodore Smith. Every time my belongings were labeled with Theodore Smith during school preparation, it felt oddly unfamiliar, as if they weren't really mine. I was too accustomed to Theodore Yates, so Theodore Smith felt strange. But contrary to my mixed feelings, my mother, Sophia, smiled warmly and said, "Honestly, I like the name Smith better than Yates. Don't you think it's a prettier name? I actually wanted your dad to take my last name when we got married, but because of family and work circumstances, it wasn't possible. I'd be happy if you grew to like your new name, too." Her cheerful demeanor made even my young self realize this divorce wasn't something to despair over. I'll try to get used to it. Still, I felt a bit frustrated that while I was so sad about our family splitting up, my mother seemed completely unfazed. However, once our separate living arrangements started, I realized we weren't exactly estranged. In fact, I think my parents got along relatively well even after the divorce. My parents discussed it and decided that I would attend a different elementary school from my brother, one in the neighboring district. However, despite being in separate school zones due to an invisible boundary, we lived relatively close to each other. It was a distance that even a young child in the lower grades could easily walk back and forth between our homes. Whenever one of my parents had to work late, they coordinated so that the one who finished earlier would take care of me. Since my grandmother lived with my father and brother, I often ended up staying at their house. I have to work late today. I've already let your dad know, so since it's Friday, you can stay at his place tonight, okay? Yay! I get to play with Charles until just before bed. I was so excited about spending time with my brother that I actually looked forward to my mother's late nights. On days I went straight to my father's house after school, taking a different route from my usual path filled me with excitement. Even when my grandmother offered, "Shall I come pick you up from school?" I would refuse. I suppose I was at that age where I wanted to prove I can do it on my own. I'm home. Theodore, welcome back as well. My 6th grade brother, who always came home later than I did, would return to the house where my grandmother and I were waiting and warmly greet me with "Welcome home." My brother, who was preparing for his middle school entrance exams, must have been busy studying. Yet he never showed any sign of annoyance and always spent time with me. You're a genius, Charles. Middle school entrance exams must be a piece of cake for you. Will you help me with my homework? Sure. But honestly, the real genius is you, Theodore. I just have the talent to work steadily and consistently. If anything, I'm more of the studious type. With his calm personality, my brother smiled as he said that. Perhaps because of our age gap, I can hardly remember us ever having a sibling fight. For me, it felt natural, but as I grew older, I finally came to understand that I was simply fortunate to have been blessed with such a wonderful older brother. Then, 25 years passed, and my brother, now 36, announced his engagement. During that time, he had stayed on the elite path without faltering. My brother entered a prestigious all-boys private school with an integrated middle and high school curriculum and passed the University of Tokyo entrance exam on his first try. After successfully graduating in 4 years, he became a government official. In other words, he became a bureaucrat. He joined the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. It is almost guaranteed that he will be appointed as the minister's executive secretary once the current one retires. My brother, brilliant and of impeccable character, is the pride of our family. When he told us he had found someone he wanted to spend his life with, our family was overjoyed. I was genuinely happy, as if it were my own good news. That said, not all of us could celebrate. Our grandmother, who had lived with my brother, had sadly passed away. I wish I could have introduced my future wife to Grandma while she was still alive. That's not something you could have helped. You hadn't even met her yet at the time. Besides, wasn't Sarah the one who supported you when you were grieving? In a way, Grandma might have been your Cupid. When I replied, trying to cheer him up, he smiled gently, the same calm smile he always had since we were kids. We had come to visit our grandmother's grave after my brother informed us of the wedding date. Watching him clasp his hands in prayer and speak sincerely to our grandmother, I was once again impressed by his integrity. Even amid his busy schedule, he took the time to honor the memory of a deceased family member. This made me respect him even more. When our grandmother passed away 3 years ago, I'm sure my brother wanted to mourn deeply. But it coincided with a particularly hectic period in his career as a bureaucrat, and he couldn't afford to take much time off. He took only the minimum bereavement leave and returned to work almost immediately. Known for his composed and reliable work ethic, my brother maintained a poker face, even as he carried the weight of losing a beloved family member. Yet, one of his subordinates, Sarah Owens, saw through his stoic facade. An exceptionally capable woman. She discreetly covered for him by fixing minor mistakes he rarely made in preparing materials in advance to ease his workload. She did all this without drawing attention to herself or taking credit for her efforts. But my brother, who was always incredibly perceptive, surely noticed. He expressed his gratitude by treating her to dinner, which became the starting point of their relationship. It was only after they began dating that he learned she was the daughter of a senior bureaucrat. When he went to introduce himself to her parents and ask for their blessing, her father, Miles, initially opposed the match quite vehemently. After visiting the grave, my brother and I spent a rare evening alone together, sharing drinks and catching up. My brother, sharing the story that only now he can laugh about, turned the intense words he received from his father-in-law upon their first meeting into a humorous tale. After introducing myself, my father-in-law said, "Did you deceive my daughter just to cozy up to a high-ranking bureaucrat like me?" I couldn't believe my ears. My brother's future father-in-law is a director at the Department of Education. Without a doubt, he is a high-ranking bureaucrat. However, even among bureaucrats or within government ministries, it's rare to encounter someone who openly refers to themselves as a high-ranking bureaucrat, which reportedly left my brother quite surprised. You're an elite bureaucrat whose future is already promising, so you don't need connections to high-ranking officials to succeed. It's ridiculous to assume you'd marry just for personal gain. Well, don't take it too hard. The father-in-law probably has had experiences with people trying to approach him for their own benefit. So it's not surprising he's overly cautious. My brother, ever magnanimous, laughed off the disrespectful attitude his father-in-law showed during their first meeting. "He's fond of you now, isn't he?" "Well, yeah, I guess, sort of." My brother, who usually speaks with such clarity, gave a hesitant response, which made me curious. The last time I saw Sarah, she mentioned, my father and Charles get along well now, which had reassured me. But could the reality be less rosy than I thought? I couldn't help but worry, was there still some lingering tension between my brother and his future father-in-law? This is a lifelong relationship. As you meet more often, he'll get to know you better, and things will naturally improve. Yeah, I guess so. I felt as though there was a hint of unease deep in my brother's eyes. So I made a conscious effort to sound upbeat as I encouraged him. Wanting to boost his confidence, I deliberately added a touch of humor to my words. Not only are you brilliant and mild-mannered, but you're also destined to be a devoted husband. Any father with a daughter of marriageable age would kill to have a son-in-law like you. As his younger brother, I'm proud of him. And even from the perspective of another man, if I were to introduce someone to a friend, he'd be the ideal recommendation. Theodore, you're too biased. I'm not such an extraordinary person. You're exaggerating. My brother humbly said this with a wry smile. But his modesty aside, my words weren't far from the truth. It's because your love for Sarah is genuine that her father finally gave his approval for the marriage, right? Apparently, my brother had visited Sarah's family multiple times to greet them and formally request their blessing. With Sarah's support and his own earnestness, he eventually earned their trust. By overcoming challenges together with Sarah, your love must have deepened. Who knew you were so passionate, Charles? I was half joking, but also half serious. Given my brother's calm and composed demeanor, it was hard to imagine him showing intense emotions or making bold declarations. Talking about love stories with you is embarrassing, so cut it out. My brother's cheeks turned slightly red as he gave a shy laugh. But as he responded to my playful remarks, I noticed his tone becoming brighter. It became clear to me that the ones who could stir change, whether for better or worse, in his otherwise even-tempered emotional state were Sarah and her family. All I could do was hope that my brother's married life would be a happy one. A month after our visit to the cemetery, my brother invited my mother and me out for a meal, saying, "The wedding invitations have been printed." On that day, the unease that had lingered in my brother's face seemed to have lifted, replaced by a refreshed, clear expression. With wedding preparations ramping up and work piling on, I probably won't have much time for close family moments like this. It seems Sarah deliberately chose not to come along this time. In fact, neither my mother nor I have met Sarah's parents yet. Of course, we've met Sarah herself several times. When they started dating with marriage in mind, my brother introduced her to me and my mother. Sarah was such a wonderful person that I was genuinely thrilled to welcome her as my sister-in-law. I feel like I've gained a daughter. I've only ever been a mother to boys, so I might overlook some things. But don't hesitate to consult me about anything. The day Sarah was introduced to us, my mother was visibly overjoyed. And it was no wonder that this was the first time my brother, who had been focused solely on academics during his years at an all-boys middle and high school, had ever introduced a girlfriend to the family. Just as Charles told me, "You're such a youthful and fashionable mother." Oh no, I'm getting ahead of myself calling you that. At the time, they weren't officially engaged yet, so she seemed embarrassed for getting ahead of herself by calling my mother mother. Sarah's face, and even her ears, turned bright red. "You're adorable. Please, feel free to call me mother, or you can just call me Sophia. Then, if it's okay, I'd like to call you mother. Honestly, my own mother isn't fond of me growing my hair long or dressing up. It's a bit presumptuous, but if you don't mind, I'd love to go shopping with you sometime and get your stylish advice." From the very first meeting, my mother and Sarah hit it off immediately. My brother and I watched their interaction with warm smiles. In fact, they've even met up without my brother on several occasions. Which is why I found it puzzling that my mother wasn't invited to the formal family meeting. My father-in-law has an exceptionally strong sense of family. He believes marriage is about the union of two families. And since our mother divorced our father and no longer shares the Yates name, he sees her as unrelated. My brother said apologetically. If he didn't invite me, it's fine, but to exclude the very mother who gave birth to you just because of a divorce? That's incredibly disrespectful. I pressed, but my brother only looked troubled. Though they work in different ministries, meaning the father-in-law isn't his direct superior. It seemed my brother couldn't go against the words of such an experienced and senior bureaucrat. I felt a surge of anger towards Sarah's father for trying to exclude our mother. It doesn't bother me. It's true I'm not part of the Yates family anymore. Besides, I know Sarah is a wonderful person, and that's enough. They're inviting me to the wedding, and I'm looking forward to seeing them on their big day. My mother, who never sweats the small stuff, responded in her usual carefree manner. Having been a decisive and action-oriented person, she had steadfastly supported me as the head of our household after becoming a single mother. She's always had nerves of steel. Thanks to her work, which often involves interacting with people from diverse backgrounds, she has a broad capacity for understanding others' perspectives. Long before the term diversity became trendy, she had been embodying it in her words and actions. If he's so particular about the engagement ceremony, there's no way he won't scrutinize the wedding guest list. Are you sure this will be okay? I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's father viewed the wedding as a stage to flaunt his connections and preserve his reputation. There was no way my sharp-witted brother hadn't picked up on his motives. As I was lost in thought, my brother lifted just the right corner of his mouth. It was a habit of his whenever he was scheming something. I've made arrangements for the wedding. You and Mom will be seated in the same family section as Dad. He handed us the wedding invitations as he spoke. 6 months later, the long-awaited wedding day finally arrived. The ceremony was a traditional wedding held at a historic shrine. The reception, set to accommodate about 100 guests, was to be held in a large hall attached to the shrine. Before the ceremony, a family introduction was planned, where the families and relatives from both sides would gather together. The limited number of family members attending the family introduction were scheduled to gather in the family waiting room earlier than the other guests. When I entered the waiting room, neither my father nor my mother was there. As I sat awkwardly on a chair in the corner, Sarah's father, Miles, approached me. "Are you Charles's brother by any chance?" The room was mostly filled with older attendees like uncles and aunts, so I suppose it was easy for him to guess I was the younger brother. On the other hand, I already recognized Miles's face from a family photo Sarah had shown me. "Yes, I'm Charles's brother, Theodore." "And you must be Sarah's father, correct?" Feeling genuinely happy to finally greet him, I responded with a smile. "Yes, that's correct. But I see no reason for you to act so familiar with me." "Excuse me." I knew I wasn't being recognized as family since I wasn't part of the Yates household, but I hadn't expected such outright hostility. It left me momentarily speechless. "I've heard about your background. Honestly, I don't think someone of your stature is fit to be associated with the distinguished Owens family. I told Charles not to include you in the family introduction, yet he defied me and brought you here." Miles's anger toward my brother was palpable. I couldn't help but feel uneasy, wondering if he was referring to that part of my history, so I cautiously asked, "By background, what exactly do you mean? There's a part of my past I'd rather others not bring up." "Well, according to Charles, you only have a middle school education. You're a perfect example of the bottom rung of society. To have someone like you claiming to be my family is an embarrassment. I reluctantly allowed you to attend the reception under the condition that you wouldn't sit in the family section. My highest level of education is middle school. Since that's an undeniable fact, I couldn't argue back." Mistaking my silence for hurt, Miles pressed on. "Before your recent job, you were probably just a temp worker, weren't you? And now you're working as a lowly editor at some small publishing company? Editors don't create anything themselves. They just ride on the coattails of authors. He sneered as he spoke. I don't mind you criticizing my education, but mocking the dignity of my supervisors and colleagues at the publishing company affects their honor. I'd like you to retract that statement about my profession. I couldn't help but respond heatedly. I didn't care how much he insulted me, but I couldn't tolerate him looking down on my colleagues. Don't talk big, you insolent brat. Miles spat dismissively. I believe bureaucrats hold a prestigious and vital role in society. But isn't your work behind the scenes? Supporting the government rather than directly running it? In that sense, it's quite similar to an editor's role in supporting authors. My words made Miles raise his voice angrily. Don't act like you know anything, you lowly editor. Budget proposals and parliamentary documents, those are just part of our job. High-ranking bureaucrats don't work behind the scenes. It's the opposite. We manipulate politicians to do our bidding while pretending to serve them. That's a terrible thing to say about your peers. When I replied, exasperated, Miles's face turned red with rage as he continued. People like you who switch jobs lack loyalty and reliability. You're useless and have no right to speak about professions. Excuse me? As I reacted to his words, Miles smirked and added, someone like you, what, second career? You're like used tea leaves. Pour hot water over them again, and they'll only produce weak, tasteless liquid. That's all you are, discarded dregs. He smirked and gestured as if to shoo me away. Leave, you middle school graduate. Miles let out a triumphant laugh for some reason. He seemed to mistakenly believe that calling me a middle school graduate was the most effective way to hurt me. The relatives, who had been silently watching with bated breath, began murmuring uneasily. It was no small thing for the bride's father to yell leave at the groom's brother, and the tension in the room was palpable. At that moment, my mother entered the waiting room dressed in a black kimono. Theodore, sorry for the wait. It took longer than expected to get dressed. Your father will be here soon too. Both my father and mother had opted for traditional Japanese attire and had been getting dressed at the venue's salon. Since my mother hadn't heard the exchange between Miles and me, she didn't realize how tense the atmosphere in the room had become. She glanced briefly at Miles, who was standing directly in front of me. Noticing his formal black kimono, which clearly signified high status, she immediately deduced that he was the bride's father. Nice to meet you. I'm Sophia Smith, Charles's mother. What? Sophia Smith. Miles's face turned pale in an instant. Oh dear, did Charles forget to even mention our names to you? My mother, surprised by Miles's unexpected reaction, hastily replied. Since you're divorced and no longer part of the Yates family, I told Charles not to mention his mother and brother. Miles, now recognizing her name, immediately understood who she was. His haughty demeanor quickly changed, and he responded in a quiet, uneasy voice. I see. So you weren't told about Theodore either. Allow me to formally introduce him. This is Charles's brother, Theodore. What? You mean Theodore Smith? Miles's face turned even paler. I just heard the name Theodore Smith. Could it be? Is he really that Theodore Smith? Murmured some of the bride's relatives, creating a buzz in the room. Suddenly, the entire family on the bride's side began to tremble visibly. Could it possibly be, are you the Theodore Smith who became a professional shogi, a traditional Japanese board game player as a teenager? Before I could respond, my mother proudly answered on my behalf. Yes, that's him. Theodore is just as much of a pride and joy to me as Charles is. My mother always praises me like that, but for me, having retired as a professional shogi player at 30 is a part of my past I'd rather keep hidden. The experience of failing to sustain a long career and facing setbacks is hardly something I can take pride in. To begin with, my professional shogi career peaked at my debut and was devoid of any real glory. Only a handful of predecessors became professional shogi players during their middle school years. Every single one of them later became a legend, creating a legendary legacy. I first participated in the 3rd Dan Rank League of the Shogi Promotion League as a 9th grader, raising hopes that I might turn pro while still in middle school. Unfortunately, I couldn't make that dream a reality. As an elementary school student, I had made a name for myself in the shogi world and was thought of as a prodigy. But in truth, I was simply enthralled by shogi and spent countless hours playing it. Unable to juggle multiple commitments skillfully, I decided not to attend high school, so I could fully focus on advancing through the 3rd Dan Rank League. Fortunately, by the time my peers reached their senior year of high school, I managed to turn professional in my 5th attempt. However, I soon hit a plateau, failed to win any titles, and never achieved any notable success before retiring. The professional world of shogi demands not only intellectual ability but also physical endurance. I think what I lacked most was the mental fortitude to keep going. My father, mother, and brother often encouraged me, saying, "Just becoming a professional is an incredible achievement. You should be proud of yourself." But I could never truly feel that way. I struggled with the gap between the ideal version of myself in my mind and the reality. And it pained me even more to feel like I was starting to dislike the game I had loved so much. So, before I grew to hate it entirely, I decided to step away from shogi. To fill that void, I took the high school equivalency exam after retiring and managed to pass. I guess I wasn't famous enough for you to recognize me right away, huh? You're kidding. You're definitely famous. When the media sensationalized your debut as a teenager, you still had the innocent face of a young boy. Honestly, your current image is so different that I didn't realize it was you until I heard your name. Miles's attitude completely flipped as he suddenly became deferential and switched to polite language. I was left stunned by the stark change in his demeanor. Shogi is often called a battle of intellect, and only a select few can go pro. It's truly admirable. I respect that. Even if I was a pro shogi player, it doesn't change the fact that I'm a middle school graduate. If academic background is your standard for judging people, I should still fall short. Well, Miles stammered, visibly flustered. At that moment, the groom and bride entered the room, already dressed for the ceremony. Though they were supposed to meet us in the family introduction room, they had apparently rushed here after hearing about the commotion. "Charles, you're awful not telling me your brother is Theodore Smith, the 6th Dan rank player, right? You should have introduced him." "Well, wasn't it you who said that anyone who left the Yates family name wouldn't be considered a relative and didn't need to be introduced?" My brother spoke with a pleasant smile, but his eyes weren't smiling at all. "And no one told me that your mother is the renowned scholar and professor, Miss Smith." For some reason, Miles directed his irrational anger at my brother. Charles, tired of repeating the same response, chose to remain silent. In truth, our mother was also well known in certain circles. While not a graduate of the University of Tokyo, she was a professor at a prestigious university and had even overseen the creation of elementary school ethics textbooks. It wouldn't have been surprising if Miles, a high-ranking official in the Department of Education, was familiar with her name. I tried introducing them to you many times, but each time, you brushed me off. Sarah, dressed in her elegant white wedding kimono and supposedly at the peak of happiness, twisted her face in frustration. But the seating chart I checked didn't have the names Sophia Smith or Theodore Smith on it. If I'd seen those names, I would have realized it beforehand. The seating chart you received was a dummy. I made sure of it to prevent you from interfering with my mother and Theodore sitting in the family section. What are you talking about? When my brother handed us the invitations and mentioned that he had taken measures, I finally understood what he meant. "I'm sorry for making you feel uncomfortable, Theodore. The reason he ordered that you and Mom not be invited to the family introduction or the meeting isn't just because you're no longer part of the Yates family. The main reason is that having a middle school graduate as a member of a bureaucratic family would harm appearances. My brother looked deeply apologetic. I had an inkling. Don't worry about it. I had hoped to persuade him before the wedding day, but he wouldn't listen. I'm truly sorry. My brother bowed his head to me, even though he had done nothing wrong. Hey, Dad. Are you satisfied now? You've always ignored my feelings and tried to manipulate everything your way. Whether your daughter is happy or not doesn't matter to you, does it? What? That's not true. Sarah, her face on the verge of tears, spoke out. Do you see this as the special day when your cherished daughter becomes a bride? Or do you think of it as a party to entertain people you want to maintain connections with? There was an expression of resignation on Sarah's face. Charles gently held her hand. That's not true. Miles's tone weakened as his daughter's piercing words hit the mark. This is Charles's and my wedding day. It's a day to introduce our lifelong partners to our guests and pledge eternal love. Ideally, we'd have had a small ceremony attended only by those who genuinely celebrate our happiness. Tears streamed from Sarah's eyes, threatening to ruin her beautifully done bridal makeup. She's the mother who left Charles after the divorce. Why would you want someone like that to celebrate this day? Miles seemed to insult my mother to deflect criticism from himself. There were unavoidable circumstances behind our parents' divorce. What? 25 years ago, you know that our father worked as a secretary for a prominent politician, don't you? Indeed, there was a reason why our family had split into separate family registers, our father and Charles on one side, and my mother and me on the other. Charles began to explain the circumstances we faced at the time and the truth behind the divorce. Back then, our father was serving as a policy secretary for a high-profile politician. One day, suspicions of a slush fund scandal surfaced involving this politician. Although our father had no involvement, he faced the risk of being scapegoated, which could have resulted in his arrest. To protect my mother and me from any fallout, my parents decided to divorce. At that time, I was a kindergartner who had already started playing shogi and had won tournaments for students under elementary school age. So my parents had high hopes for my talent. They likely worried that if our father were arrested, it would leave a permanent stain on my records. If they were concerned about such damage, my brother would also have been at risk. However, being a sixth grader at the time and already considered a prodigy, my parents decided to be honest with him about the situation. My responsible brother had already chosen his path, deciding he wanted to become a politician in the future. He was observant of political and economic trends, and based on his assessment of the police's actions and the circumstances surrounding the politician, he concluded that neither the politician nor our father was likely to be arrested. Believing it would be advantageous to continue using the Yates name, he chose to stay with our father. Our grandmother, who didn't want to part with Charles, the eldest grandson and future heir, also influenced this decision. Of course, as a mother, it was natural for her to want to shield both of her sons from any potential harm. She initially insisted on taking custody of both of us. However, our father, who strongly believed in respecting a child's autonomy, honored Charles's decision. Ultimately, these differing approaches to parenting led to their divorce. But it wasn't a divorce rooted in hatred or bitterness. It was more of a staged separation, and even after living apart, our family relationships remained harmonious. Unlike my own family, yours is a wonderful one where everyone genuinely cares for each other. That's why I decided I wanted to be part of it and chose to marry. Hearing Sarah say this about our family moved me deeply, and my chest filled with warmth. When I glanced to my side, I saw my mother was also touched, tears streaming down her cheeks. I had a faint hope that on our wedding day, my father might prioritize my feelings, but it seems I overestimated him. Dad, let's cut ties as father and daughter to mark this new beginning. It was clear that Sarah, after giving Miles countless warnings and chances to change, had finally reached her breaking point. Sarah, I understand how you feel, but let's not do this. That's right, Sarah. My mom and I aren't bothered by this. Let's commemorate this new chapter by letting it go. Cutting ties between parent and child is no small matter. Deep down, I believe Sarah didn't truly wish for it either. Despite his flaws, Miles would still be my brother's father-in-law. To make this a truly special and joyous day for their lives, we needed a fresh start. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Please don't say we should cut ties as parent and child. I beg you. I'll make an effort to change my ways from now on. Faced with Sarah's final warning, Miles seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. Even he, usually so arrogant, bowed his head in submission and apologized. Fine. I'll allow you to attend the wedding today as a special exception. But don't think you're completely forgiven. If you ever show disrespect to Charles or his family again, I won't hesitate to act. Make sure you remember that clearly. Sarah delivered her warning sharply. Seeing this unexpected stern side of Sarah didn't surprise me, but it made me feel that she was a dependable partner for my brother. Charles has his sights set on transitioning from being a bureaucrat to becoming a politician. A politician's wife needs strength, and Sarah showed she had it. Okay. I understand. Overwhelmed by his daughter's commanding presence, Miles nodded repeatedly and vigorously. I clapped my hands loudly. All right, everyone. Actually, the scheduled start time has long passed. The staff are probably confused and unsure of what to do. Let's wrap up the family introductions quickly and get ready for the ceremony. I deliberately used a bright tone to change the mood. That's a good idea. Sarah, head back to the bridal room and have your makeup touched up. My mother, ever adaptable, picked up on my intent and took charge with a positive outlook. Just then, my father strolled in, as if to say, better late than never. When I asked where he had been until now, he gave a pitiful reply. I was so nervous that I was hiding in the bathroom. After being forced into retirement when the secretary position he hoped to pass on to my brother was taken by the son of a politician, my father lost the air of a trusted aide to a powerful figure. He now exuded the warmth of a friendly, ordinary man. However, his entrance softened the previously frozen atmosphere, transforming the mood completely. Finally, the family introductions before the ceremony were conducted in an abbreviated manner due to time constraints. Afterward, the wedding ceremony at the shrine's main hall and the reception proceeded smoothly without any further issues. Looking back, I was relieved that the conflict had been resolved within the family waiting room, away from the guests, sparing us from any embarrassment. With the issues resolved, both Charles and Sarah looked radiant, appearing like the happiest couple in the world. Seeing my beloved brother receiving blessings from so many people moved me deeply, and I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. As there were many guests, I hadn't expected to be asked to give a speech. However, as a surprise from the bride and groom, the MC handed me the microphone. Charles, Sarah, congratulations on your marriage. Charles, you've always believed in me and protected me. Overwhelmed with emotion, tears blurred my vision, and my words faltered as my heart swelled with gratitude. I managed to compose myself and express my heartfelt thanks, and I was met with warm applause from all the guests. I used to think I might be fine staying single forever, but seeing how happy my brother and his wife looked, I realized that marriage might not be such a bad thing after all. More than anything, seeing my parents, both crying tears of joy, made me want to show my gratitude and be more filial to them. I've tasted failure in the world of professional shogi. However, that experience has allowed me to find a new way to connect with the game as an editor writing articles about shogi. Though I once came close to hating shogi, now I'm working to promote it in a different way, supporting those who dream of success in the game. On this day, when my brother and Sarah pledged eternal love and began their new journey together, I felt like I received a share of their happiness. I silently vowed to move forward with my own life with purpose and determination.